Let us go on. Uh, these are now the working sessions around the different themes were chosen as part of that agenda, as part of that declaration and roadmap during the last summit in June of last year. Organizing these agenda was not easy at all. And I usually say that the most advantaged are those who may come here in an in-person way. It's not always possible, but it's uh, it's preferable. Sometimes just not possible. We will have an in-person speaker, Carlos Malamud, main researcher of the Instituto Elcano, and a professor of the UNED. I have more details about his biography on our website and your folders. And we also have Érika Rodriguez Pinzón, who is the director of the Carolina Foundation. Despite, unfortunately, because of a uh, trip that she has, hopefully she's online. Yes, I am, says Érika. So, without any further ado, let us hear from them both, and then we'll have some time for debate in order to um, uh, to speak about those. Thank you very much, Carlos. Floor is yours. Very good morning, very good evening. Well, thank you very much to the Yuste Foundation for the possibility coming back here to Guadalupe after a long time and for being with you all. I've been asked to speak about global peace and security, which is a very simple thing to do, right? In 20 minutes. But, given the largeness of the task, I would focus on how the European Union and Latin America approach this and how this approach is inserted into the bi-regional relationship and around what impact these things may have in the next EU CELAC summit. This topic is very closely related with the previous presentation, with the subject of the previous presentation. And that's our common uh, fate, our common values, and the defense of multilateralism. At the beginning of the 1990s, the Rio summit was celebrated, and that started somehow the bi-regional relationship between the European Union and and Latin America. The sole idea of shared values and a shared destiny seemed then enough in order to build a common process uh, based on solid uh, anchors. It was thought that these bi-regional alliance having the majority of votes in the United Nations and other multilateral organisms would have a brilliant future. Nonetheless, when we speak of shared values about the belonging of Latin America to the Western world, beyond those affinities, there are also some dissonances that appear. Some countries, just Bolivia, have a government prioritizing not that Western belonging, but their belonging to their indigenous roots and to a phenomena which is very much spoken in the US and other parts of the world, which is the phenomena of decolonization. If we speak about Western values, what type of Western values are we to talk about? Are we to talk about the Western values that Javier Milei put yesterday on the table during his encounter with Prime Minister Maloney in Buenos Aires? His negation of the 2030 agenda of climate change, and so on and so forth. I'll say some more. If we stay on what joins us, what ties us together, if we stay on our common values, and if we continue to move, allow me to say that, uh, around self-complacency, we'll obviously become stagnant. We will not have a possibility for moving forward, for making progress. I'm sorry to say so, but this is one of the advantages that I have for being an academic and not a diplomat. I have the possibility for expressing myself in such a way. And uh, before I go on, let me say something else about bi-regional relationships. I was saying that the Rio summit was the one formally creating this bi-regional relationship. I insist on and underline the word formally, because as a matter of fact, the relationships relationship between Latin America and Europe come from way before that. They're solidly established. They are based on several intangible goods, many of them moving below the radar line of cultural and diplomatic statistics. We have personal, family, social relationships. We have relationships in all orders of reality: scientific, sports, cultural, academic. We have uh, migratory flows in both senses. We have migrant colonies here and there. I'm actually part of one of them. We have exchanges of all sorts. So we've seen in time that it's not enough with sharing values. And we've also seen, especially after the 2008 crisis, the subprime crisis, that there's been an increasing lack of interest of European Union in Latin America. It's true that as the 21st century went on, Latin America also uh, moved from what it had been in the 90s. Latin America was starting to be uh, different. There was a Latin America with Bolivarianism and populisms surged. Today, populism is a global phenomenon. It's a polyedric global phenomenon, a phenomenon having thousand faces. Trump and Milei on one side, Ortega and Lopez Obrador on the other side. Uh, and I'll pass on other name. Latin America is a fundamentally fragmented region today. That makes it possible to come to consensuses both on a regional and on a global. And there's yet another factor to bear in mind, and that's the violence between interpresidential relationship. The treatment between Latin American presidents have crossed some red lines that were unthinkable of um, uh, by using tweets, by using social media. Their relationships have become, uh, in some cases, impossible. So how do we manage a regional uh, politics? We have to make a difference between the management of foreign policy in the European Union, which is not a sea of roses either, but at least there is the common agreement regarding the High Representative, the common service for foreign action, um, uh, which is in contrast with the cacophony of this lag. There have been some uh, recent uh, critics from some Latin American governments to the pro tempore presidents. In this relationship, these Euro Latin American relationships sat on the unsuccess of the 2015 Brussels summit of the EU CELAC. That didn't help. But also, there's something else that didn't help. Um, there was the wish for signing a treaty that was unbridgeable with the Mercosur. Hopefully, the next months or weeks will bring some positive news. Let's hope that the negotiations continue to be open. And everything would have been in the same way. Um, but then there came the Russian invasion of Ukraine, showing a great paradox. First, against all prognostics, the European Union kept together much more. It stuck much more together than many would have thought. Secondly, the European Union was much more isolated than many would have thought as well. And the need Anika was speaking about during the previous session for renovating and for strengthening alliance makes Latin America emerge as a fundamental factor. Together with this, as part of the renovation of the role of Latin America for the European Union, the role of the High Commissioner, Josep Borrell, and its clear commitment to the region to reinforce the bi-regional relationship has been essential. There is, despite all of that, not yet a clear turn of thing. The global gateway is not enough for that yet. There start to be some positive, new, hopeful signs that a renewed interest of the European Union for Latin America. Nonetheless, the invasion of Ukraine also showed some differences on how distant Europe is from Latin America. Obviously, we want to stay within self-complacency. We want to say how well things are. We may see when we go to the recent General Assemblies of the United Nations, where where countries voted around this. But if we analyze the support for the Ukraine one and for the call for Latin American countries with a Russian origin that they sell them to or give them to Ukraine, how frustrating meetings with President Zelensky, either in person or virtual, or how the empathy works between the European Union and Ukraine. Now, how to translate that to Latin America, we will realize that things are quite different. During the past few days, Mexico, Brazil, Chile, and Colombia, four Latin American countries, have urged to prevent a an arms escalate aggravating the conflict between Ukraine and Russia. Uh, that is, in principle, uh, very good. It is, very laudable and commendable. But I think that it's a very biased call, not taking into account the nature of the conflict. It's a call whereby these countries in the region and some other countries in the region haven't said anything about the presence of North Korean troops in Russia and Ukraine, or about the continuous attack to civil uh, um, goals and infrastructures in Ukraine on the part of Russia. And that is even more less commendable because Latin America has a tradition for defending um, the civil populations, the strata doctrine. Actually, some of the countries have it as part of the constitutional text. The non um, uh, condemnation clearly and frontally of the Russian invasion of Ukraine is in contradiction with their foreign policy tradition. The attacks of Hamas against Israel last year, plus the uh, uh, Israeli response, is also an element of differentiation. Here we see that the modularization of responses of some uh, are, make it a different case, and we cannot uh, um, think that it's the same case as for the previous topic. This is also part of the global uh, conflict between the US and China, having Latin America an important backstage scenario. And we might wonder, what's Europe got to do with all of this? Especially if we take into account the early installation in Washington, January the 20th, of a new administration um, with the presence of Trump in the White House. What would be the role of Europe in the foreign policies of the US? What would be the role of Latin America in the US, or the place of Latin America in the foreign policy of US? What would be the place of Ukraine? What would be the place of the European Union and all of that? Bear in mind that the new Secretary of State will be Marco Rubio. What will happen to the US policies towards Cuba, Nicaragua, and Venezuela? What will happen with very sensitive topics such as migration, drug trafficking, fentanyl, and the TANIC treatment, the future of the TANIC treatment, that is Mexico, the US, and Canada? Despite the fact that both countries move around uh, autonomy, it's not, coming closer to that strategic autonomy of the European Union with their foreign policy service, not the same as it is for Latin America, which is a very fragmented region.
There we have, for example, the China Select summits that are just lip service. It's just a staging of how well we get together when in reality, what is clear is that relations between China and Latin America are bilateral. Europe and the US too abandoned Latin America? This is a question. We in the Elcano Institute wrote a report that was called Why Does Latin America Matter? And there we questioned that idea. There is an increasing presence of China in Latin America. Recently, this was started coinciding with the Chancay Summit in Peru, but this presence that is not just merely a trade presence on a trade basis, and that is increasingly strong, must be um, analyzed critically. For example, from a human relations perspective, I'm talking about migration, tourism, university students, remittances. On that perspective, the relationship between Europe and South America and the US and Central America and the Caribbean is stronger than the relationship with China. If we're talking about sales of weapons, the same goes. If we're talking about direct investments, foreign direct investments, it's true that Chinese investment is growing, but the difference measured in terms of flows or stocks, the difference is still major. It is also true that China is growing, but if we fall asleep, that gap will grow. This is why it's also important to close that EU-Mercosur agreement, because that would be a very important sign in terms of the interest of Europe in Latin America and the Caribbean. There is a major aspect, which is organized crime. I think my time is running out. Okay, organized crime and drug dealing. Considering the uh, transnationalization of drug cartels in Latin America, this strengthens the need to cooperate, international cooperation, but also regional cooperation and bi-regional cooperation. And the major question here is what Lenin wondered in his day, what to do. What to do in the face of the future, what to do in the face of the 2025 Bogota summit. And the definition of the agenda here is fundamental in this regard. We must obviously include and not uh, look over essential elements for the bi-regional elements like peace and security, because uh, if we don't do this, the relationship between Latin America and the Caribbean will remain wonderful in rhetoric terms, but won't have enough solid basis. Thank you very much. Thanks so much, Carlos, for this wonderful presentation that leaves many topics on the table. We will have to raise these elements again later during the day. I'm going to give the floor to Érika Rodríguez Pinzón. I can see that she's already on screen. Érika is the director of the Carolina Foundation. I think this is the first time that you participate in this Yuste forum as the director of the foundation, because Érika uh, has been a common presence in our summer courses, but she was just appointed. So congratulations for this new position. Without any further ado, we're going to give you the floor, and hopefully we'll have a few minutes for debate. Thank you very much. And I want to start by apologizing because, as Miguel Ángel said, I'm a common speaker in the summer courses, and I know how wonderful it is to be in Yuste, and it's a pity that I can't be there. But this afternoon I have to fly to Carlos's homeland, Argentina. I'm flying to Buenos Aires. I'm not going to repeat things that Carlos already mentioned and that I agree with. First is this framework of global uncertainty and the situation that we have with regard to the great wars. There are security challenges, and Europe is facing a challenge and a threat. So uh, the European challenge is not properly understood. So this affects uh, the local Latin America political situation. There's a hardship to understand a consensus in the face of the war of Ukraine, and this made some challenges emerge. The dialogue in democracy is facing problems, and there is a very specific vision of imperialism, North American imperialism, and other tensions that didn't make it possible to build a common vision. And as Carlos was saying, and I agree with him, there are deep internal inconsistencies. For example, um, having this very superficial um, challenge of what we are facing. And then we have the conflict in Gaza. In the foundation, we published our own analysis and the different visions in the region that reflect different social processes. Countries like Chile that have received a Palestinian community, or other countries that have this a similar situation. And then we have the case of Argentina with a higher presence of Jews. So there are social tensions that emerge, and there are social situations and relationships that have been being developed over time in terms of relations with Palestine and Israel. This um, makes some conflicts emerge that hadn't been seen light yet. As Carlos was saying, we are in a period of deep um, uh, international relations are not a matter of of chancellors or ministries, and this is a situation of banalization. Dialogues are sorry, foreign policy is being trivialized. So some governments have the deep intention to uh, strengthen their populist views and the construction of a narrative of strength internally. So there's no option to have regional dialogues and to propose a framework to address challenges in terms of security. And the dialogue with Europe that cannot go beyond specific cooperation. So there are some agreements, there are some dialogues, but they are very specific and punctual. We have to understand that the agenda of security in Latin America diverges from the agenda in the rest of the world. While we had the process of struggle against terrorism that was very important in the European and US agenda, the situation in Latin America was different. Beyond Colombia, there were no terrorist groups, and they just operated in Colombia, so that didn't affect the foreign affairs that much. We were not talking about fragile states that could create threats for the rest of Europe. So in the first part of the 20th century, the security framework um, didn't feature that sort of threats. Latin America is a society of peace. Security agendas were only looking at each other, and Latin America uh, follow this current in terms of security challenges, because Latin America's security challenges were mostly internal. Carlos already mentioned that there's a key aspect, which is internal insecurity and organized crime. But it's not a just any type of insecurity. In the case of Latin America, it's a profoundly violent insecurity. So the social impact is major. It's a very complex insecurity. Drug dealing is just one part, but it doesn't account for everything. The phenomenon is much larger, and the problem is that insecurity goes well beyond drug dealing, and it's a phenomenon of insecurity that extended in the region. So it started in specific countries that have had very powerful problems, like Mexico and Colombia. The problem expanded and began to to be the major uh, the major problem. Everyone in Latin America is scared. It's the major citizen concern. It's a very real concern. People are scared that something may happen in your car, in your house, uh, or your loved ones may suffer problems. You, your house, your anyone can be uh, yeah, impacted. So this framework requires some better understanding in the European Union. We are trying to explain, and the European Compass is trying to put the European vision in the international arena, and how important this stability is in a multilateral system based on rules, as it is included in the summit's statement. We have to what's happening in Latin America needs to be properly understood, because there are many shared threats. The insecurity agenda in Latin America and the structure and the architecture of insecurity needs to be understood. As I was saying, historically, this insecurity has been marked by drug dealing. These drug dealing groups had a large economic power that made them uh, structures that can um, dialogue on a one-to-one basis with states, because they have the capacity to be on a same level with some governments, especially in some regions of the countries. And this created large criminal governance, where organized crime has has created alliances with other smaller groups, creating what I refer to as the diversification of the crime portfolio. Drug dealing is not necessarily, I mean, it's a very important aspect that explains the strength of many groups, but the complexity of crime needs to be understood considering the diversification of the crime portfolio. There's something that demands political policies, and that is extortion. In Latin America, this uh, terrible, Salvador was a horrible example. There was a mafia that was a predator of the social tissue, but this created a large level of support that weakened these groups. But this is not the case in other countries, because this extortion tissue in other countries came together with a social management system, thanks to which criminal governance and the creation of states with different densities. There are different levels of density. In some places, um, the management is softer. We have criminal um, groups that are operating in different ways. So here we have this criminal governance with extortion systems that also create social regulation systems. And this is creating challenges when it comes to managing this problem. Um, Local answers are needed. This is important for mayors, but this also calls for long-term responses, and responses that have to do with the historic gaps in Latin America, like institutional gaps, social gaps. Organized crime, it creates jobs in the region. It creates control systems and cohesion systems in some parts of the region and in some areas, particularly in the rural areas where drugs are grown. So this is the scenario that is very complex, and the only real value change that is operating is organized crime, because it is what has articulated all the capacities, all the different levels. We have the regional level, the sub-regional level, the local levels, and capacities have been articulated, and the particularities and specificities of each region have been articulated. What's a major aspect when it comes to responding? Latin America does indeed need help in this process. Regional fragility or weakness doesn't help, because there's not an environment uh, that makes it possible to create platform to combat crime. There's no space for sharing experiences and capacities, and there is a lack disconnection on an internal level in the countries. And this is something that should not be overlooked in the face of the emergency that Carlos was mentioning. There are many different regimes uh, that are populist, and there is a national uh, disconnection in terms of there's a lack of connection between policies that may respond to the situation. And this is happening at a time when, as it was mentioned, there's a change in the presence of the United States, because the US had always been a key stakeholder when it came to supporting security strategies, like in the case of uh, organized crime. And the cooperation of the US has been present up until now. We don't know what Trump's strategy is going to be, because the threat has changed. The production has changed. The production of fentanyl in the US uh, creates a further complexity in the drug production. This has been as a trend that is expanding, and there's a huge crisis in the US. Fentanyl is a process that has to do with the Chinese production of its components, and uh, it also happens in Mexico. This has changed the structure of cocaine production. There's an overproduction of coke in the region of the Andes. There are new producers. Honduras is starting to uh, grow coke, and there's a change in patterns that call for a different international strategy. But we're in a moment of uncertainty, because we don't know what tools the US will feature. It's usually um, uh, they usually have a policy of the stick and the carrot, but we have the feeling that Trump will focus more on the um, stick than the carrot. So we don't really know what their strategy is going to be starting from now. So there is a space and for further cooperation with the European Union. We have worked on the social policies. There's room for more powerful tools, and more powerful technological tools are also necessary. The Cyber Defense Center in Santo Domingo is a good step, but we need to go beyond that. And I'm going to wrap up with this. Organized crime is not a threat that is restricted to Latin America. It destabilizes all democracies, and it is a spearhead for social destabilization in Europe. What's happening in Sweden, what's happening in other places um, is not alien to what's happening in Latin America. What's happening in Latin America destabilizes everywhere. We have the dialogue between cities a sub-regional, sub-national dialogue is necessary between cities, and this has been happening, but not in a structured way. This dialogue is necessary to share capacities, and we need a strong dialogue to create security ports in the framework of democracy. Thank you. Thank you very much, Érika, for this presentation where you addressed global security in a very specific way in the region of Latin America and the Caribbean. I wrote down a sentence that um, I feel it's very powerful. The only topic that Latin America have in common is that they are all scared. I think this sentence should make us reflect because it's true that if we see it in a positive way, there's a common front. And we should see how we can face in reality this problem. Because as you said in the last part of your intervention, this problem is expanding to Europe. I live in Brussels, and we read on the headlines that there are shootings everywhere, that these shootings have to do with drug dealing and that there are mafias that are being increasingly hard to control and that have increased share of power. We have a few minutes for debate. I'm going to I'm going to take the liberty to shorten the coffee break to have a little debate. Carlos Malamud was mentioning some of the problems of the region that is a fragmented region. Maybe to break the ice, I would like to make a question. How can we face this uh, common security challenge, and how can we unite the region in the face of this problem? What solutions could we solve for the future, understanding that peace and security that are one of the priorities for the 2023 that were the that were the priorities in the 2023 topic are going to remain there. The problem is that there's not that much that we can do here in Europe to solve a problem in Latin America. This fragmentation, those divisions in Latin America can only be uh, bridged by Latin Americans themselves. There's nothing that the European Union can do. Spain can't do anything, much less than the European Union. The US can't do anything, and China can't do anything. The only thing that we can do is, on the one hand, to strengthen the bi-regional cooperation, keeping in mind all the limitations that there are to this end. And we must also strengthen the bilateral relations with those countries that are more interested in advancing in this path. Because we usually talk about Latin America as if it were unity, and we talk about the European Union as if it were a unity. There are many Latin Americans, and that's a cliche. But however, it's true that not all Latin American countries respond in the same way from the perspective of our relationships with the European Union. Some countries are very, uh, some countries are uh, more refractory or resistant, like Nicaragua, and some others are more willing. And those are the ones that we have to work with. What we can't do is to aspire, as it happened in the past, aspire uh, to solve all Latin American problems from the European Olympus. And the idea was that the best tool was regional integration. That's what happened in the past. In Latin America, there's an emphasis on the large, um, on the integration And it is also said that Latin America doesn't get integrated because it's not given the opportunity. The main responsibility for the non-integration of Latin America is lies on Latin Americans themselves. So
So from that perspective, regional integration, unless the premises are changed, the premises upon which we are based now, have is very is short-lived. Will be short-lived. Regional integration is greatly ideologized and politicized. Ideology primes over concrete national interests, and regrettably, for such a long history of European integration, um, because actually both came around the same time, we have seen that we have seen only two relatively successful processes for regional integration in Latin America, and they're both linked to crime. The first was the Condor operation in the 70s and 80s, when the military dictatorships in the Southern Cone and in Latin America in general were extremely efficient, uh, putting aside borders and sovereignty, etc., in order to repress torture, etc., in a coordinated way, and they did that, and they were successful at that. And now, recently, when it comes to drug trafficking, drug cartels are showing similar behavior. And while drug cartels are making progress is beyond borders, national government are still incapable of coordinating policies and cooperating around policies enabling to solve that problem. Thank you very much, Carlos. Anybody from the audience or from the table wish to speak now? Yes, please. Yes, Alberto, please. Thank you very much for these two useful presentations. I just wanted to think of a new dimension. There's a restriction of the civic space. I think um, that is also a fact. There are attacks to the press, you know, independently of their political color. So you were asking what can be done. Well, I think that we should find a space for intervention there. So the president of the foundation was speaking about security, but I think it's not, on those terms that we have to be aware of that. Yes, thank you very much. Carlos Chesa now, please. Pablo Chesa, sorry. Just wanted to add something to what's been said by Alberto. I think that Carlos and Erika were present at the Encuentro de Sahib, where the importance of confidence, of trust, was underlined. Institutions, both public institutions or the press as an institution as well, are very important to create democratic spaces and to create security spaces. So I think that's a fundamental aspect. And I'll add a small positive note regarding security. The CAF and the World Bank and some others are launching together with us in less than a month a new alliance for security, uh, peace, and development that 13 countries have already decided to sign from Latin America and the Caribbean. First presidency, or temporary presidency, will be taken by Ecuador as a follow-up to the summit of Guayaquil that took place in August. there are 3 multilateral banks there, and we want to have resources for civic justice and for development. That is more milestone, but it's a good token for cooperation and coordination here, and all members of the EU are have been invited, and we've seen a keen interest on participating there because of what Érika was saying as well, because of trafficking problems impacting Europe as well, not just Latin America. Thank you very much, Pablo. Érika, will you add something to the input that we've heard here? And after your words, you will close up. Yes, I go very fast. I totally agree with Carlos. Europe is not going to fix that because that's a problem of Latin America that needs a very wide approach in Latin America. But it's true. And I'm going to join both talks. There is a civic space. There's a space there to. We lost you? Oh, sorry. Yes, in other regions of the world, it was clear during the UNGAS, the summit. Sorry, the General Assembly on Drugs of the United Nations. There is a space, a civic space between Latin America and the European Union where we can build around press freedoms, human rights, etc. There is a huge dialogue that we can establish because there's a space there for common values. They're not the ones exclusively building the relationship, but they're always present there. And regarding trust, Carlos was referring to it. There are two things around that, I'd say. Trust is fundamental, but it's not just the confidence between institutions that has been broken, it's the confidence between the people, the persons. Because the people are afraid from each other. There is a huge migratory uh, flow. There's a uh, ramping xenophobia. Interpersonal confidence, interpersonal trust should be there. Uh, we've been very fragile in approaching trust, rebuilding trust, etc. That's a call for the alliance of the 3 banks there. And there's something else. And I go back to what Carlos was saying. I was part of the security, was president of the security conference of Guayaquil, and it was clear that each country had a totally different vision there. One country said, what I use is exceptions to the rule of law to combat that, but I don't break the law. And another country said, I have technological measures, etc. So there was a lack of unification around some common goals, not all of them, right? But at least we should find some common goals so that the region can build a regional dialogue. And if the alliance between those 3 banks was good to create just a common agenda that could articulate a regional dialogue around which everybody would speak on the same terms, so we would create advancements despite the difficulties of fragmentation. Thank you very much, Érika. We are a little bit delayed since the very beginning, so we have to cut off here. But we thank everyone for their fruitful words and very good for the report that we'll have to make. As we've said before, if you can send us some notes, if you will, on a written shape, it'll help us to write our report. We're gonna send you this report, Érika, comprehending all talks and all articles. We do a publication annually, and if you are willing to send us something, we'll be ready to publish. Have a good trip back to Argentina, and we'll see you in Brussels, December the 3rd. Carlos, thank you very much as well. We'll follow on, but we're gonna make about a 20-minute pause or a 20-minute coffee break. Thank you.